right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpenka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam to your right. I'd also like to take a moment to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Grandview Drive by Tim Blackett, published by Nightwood Editions. Thank you to Tim for being here tonight, and to Lisa Bird Wilson for joining us as host. Tim Blackett is a Canadian writer whose work has appeared in Briarpatch, Spaces, and a small Saskatchewan journal called Swift Flowing. His short story collection, Grandview Drive, placed second in the John V. Hicks Long Manuscript Award, and the titular story was longlisted for the Carter V. Cooper Short Fiction Award. Lisa Bird Wilson is a Saskatchewan Métis and Cree writer whose award-winning novel, Probably Ruby, was shortlisted for the Governor General's Literary Award and the Amazon First Novel Award. Lisa lives in Saskatoon and is the CEO of the Gabriel Dumont Institute, Canada's first Métis post-secondary education and cultural institute. I'll now turn things over to Tim. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to McNally Robinson and for you guys for being here, and particularly Lisa Bird Wilson. In fact, it was she who suggested I submit the book to Nightwood in October of 2022 at a writing conference. So I feel like I have a lot to Lisa. Just being here, she had a hand in that, so it's cool that she gets to be here. The main critique I have had at all of my readings is that I do not speak loud enough. So please, if you can't hear me, someone holler. Can you hear me at the back? Okay. So I'm gonna read a couple stories, and then I think Lisa and I are gonna have a bit of a conversation about writing and different things. So I'm just so glad that you were able to make it. If you happened upon the event, that's cool. If you came specifically to see me, that's even more cool. Makes me feel cool that people are reading my work and thinking about it. So yeah. So I've chosen two short stories. There's a number of longer ones that I would love to read, but I just don't have the time in a space like this. So I think I'll start with a story. This is one of my favorite stories in the collection, if I'm allowed to say that. It's called Baby Oh Baby. And this story came out of a creative writing class I was taking at university. That class was called Writing the Body. And the focus of it was writing the physical human body in our stories. So all of the prompts were around this idea. She wanted to have bits about like the abject, and like, so there was lots of like bodily fluids in the stories and stuff like this. But this came out of a prompt that was towards the end of the class where she wanted us to write a story without a body, whatever that meant to us. She didn't give us a lot of like specifics. She wanted us to stretch and to write this story. And so this was a long time ago, maybe 2011. Of course, the version in here is probably 5 or 6 different versions after that, but it birthed out of that class, and I remember that class fondly. I'm rambling now, but in the middle of that class, my daughter was born, and I had to leave the class to go be with her. So, start the story. So this is called Baby Oh Baby. It's later than I'd like. Some lady on the TV, red-eyed and smiling like she's getting away with something, is confessing that since her husband died, she's been carrying his ashes around with her, holding him, smelling him, tasting what's left of him. Each day she takes a pinch of him, slips it into her mouth, and lets her saliva and the pressure of her tongue pressing against her cheeks, her teeth, the roof of her mouth, transform him into a semi-solid ball, a pill she can swallow to rid herself for a moment of her relentless sorrow. It's disgusting, the daughter, who has just discovered that her mother eats her father, is saying. I understand she's grieving, but she could take up painting or gardening. She could take flowers to the cemetery every day if she wanted. Build a goddamn greenhouse over his grave and live in it. It's just gross. The TV therapist straightens his tie and tells the camera it's not abnormal to experience these types of quirks while grieving. He's just glad she's seeking the proper help. But I'm watching this lady eat her husband again and again. They're showing her pinch, pressed, taste, masticate, smile, her little eyes half closed, swallow. And I'm thinking she doesn't want any help. They should leave her alone. Let her finish the rest of it, of him. My own daughter was a go-getter. She had an ambition I couldn't understand. Even her labor lasted a mere 2.5 hours. She could speak in sentences and sing the alphabet before she was 2. She could read her own bedtime stories before she started kindergarten. In 2nd grade, when Miss Garrison asked, what would you like to be when you grow up? She said, she wants to be like Forrest Gump. Like Forrest Gump, but not retarded. You'll forgive her use of the R word, I hope. She's only 6 when she says it. She had been so taken with the movie. How come he walks like that? How come she makes that noise? How come he talks like that? Why is she naked? She skipped 1st grade, then 3rd grade, graduated at 15. I'll take a year off, she said, when people asked her what she would do next. I'll take a year off to see the world, to run a marathon. Yes, I said, but what will you really do? And she looked at me funny, as if I should have known she was going to do exactly as she said. Run, Mummy, run, she said. And she ran in the Boston Marathon, in the New York City Marathon. She set a world record for the most official marathons run in a single year. I think I'll go back to school, she said after running. She finished a liberal arts degree, double major, philosophy and history, in 3 years. Playing any ping pong? I asked her on the phone during her 3rd year. Table tennis, she said, for anyone who's serious about it. And yes, she said, I am. She was the NCAA champion 2 years in a row. I just hope you don't enlist in the Army, I told her. What's that supposed to mean, she said. Forrest Gump, I said. And she enlisted in the Marines the week following her convocation. She climbed the ranks and was sent to Iraq, where she was wounded saving civilians from Islamic extremists, for which she was awarded the Victoria Cross, the first Canadian to receive the honor. She did not show the Governor General her ass when they placed it around her neck. She wrote about her experiences in a memoir, which was deeper than anything I could have imagined. The great thinkers of the world declared it a scary realization of the world around us. This book, if taken seriously, will start a revolution. Italics theirs. It was a New York Times It was a New York Times #1 bestseller by the time she stood for her reading at the Barnes & Noble on the Avenue of the Americas in New York City, 3.5 weeks into her tour, which was cut short before I was even able to attend a single reading due to her unfortunate assassination. The revolution would follow swiftly. She donated her organs for scientific research via the micro-document she kept folded in her wallet, signed. The rest of her body they cremated. She sits on the mantle under the TV. I tell this story to strangers over coffee, after my yoga classes, to my bus drivers who nod politely and shake their heads and say, that's crazy. I tell pieces of it during my Thursday night cribbage club, at my Wednesday evening support group for parents who have lost children. I tell this story so often I know just when to slow down, to elaborate, to get people to really listen. To the yoga class, I slip into details of her training, how she would run 10 to 14 miles before I even got out of bed, how she would eat fish and chicken and grains and vegetables, but the night before races, she'd eat a huge bowl of spaghetti with just a smidgen of butter, though this is not recommended, how she seemed happiest with a breeze in her face and the asphalt thumping along under her sneakers. I tell them how, as a teenager, she placed in the top 10 in 2 races, unheard of for a 16-year-old. I save the details of her assassination for the bus drivers, who no doubt tire of the usual stories they hear from the regulars about the bargains they found on their fingerless gloves, whose eyes widen at the word. assassinated. They look at me in the mirror, anxious to hear how the crowds gathered, how the bookstore, all three levels, was packed wall to wall with eager spectators. It's a wonder no one else was killed in the stampede, I tell them. I lower my voice. The stampede after the man who did it. Tattoos on his forearms and neck, a single faded teardrop under one eye, the hint of a black ink under his thinning hair, ripped black jeans, a chip in his front tooth. I paused to let the image sit there in front of us. He jumped onto the stage, shoved over the podium, and plunged a knife into her neck while her fans went screaming for the door. To the support group, I tell her she would write home every week. She was away at college, twice a week from Iraq, with extra postcards here and there. How she would never write to complain, only with some uplifting tidbit of information that would provide a simple epiphany of sorts. I tell them how the day before she died, I would never use assassinate here. She wrote a letter that said, I feel something big is coming, something that could bring about real change, finally. I'm only glad to do my own little part. I tell them how she ended the letter so perfectly. I feel as if something is urging me to tell you just how much I love you. I've tried writing a poem, but found nothing conveys my feelings better than I love you. You must pretend, Mother, that this is the first time I've said it, for I feel a new adoration for you with each day I am away. I quote this from memory and watch their tears well up. I tell these stories, because I'm always shocked when I realize nobody else is ever thinking of her. No one else will ever acknowledge this sorrow. I tell it because I like the stunned look on people's faces when they find out how wonderful she was, how much she was able to do, the life she led. I tell it because I like the way they shake their heads and rub my shoulder or give me a hug, how they cry along with me and say, it's not your fault. I tell it so that for a moment she is real, to offer proof she has not been imagined. I tell it because I can't bear to tell them I didn't even realize I was pregnant. I met her father at the scene of a horrific traffic accident. We both ran to see a man already dead lying in the street. My daughter's father seemed so calm and unaffected by the bloody mess. I was uncontrollably drawn to him, terrified of him, but unable to leave his side. He said we had to get away. He asked if we should go for coffee, but we walked to Bubba's and got drunk instead. We slept together at my apartment. I remember being scared of how he was looking down at me, like he had just found something he had lost a long time ago. We were still drunk when he woke up, and I made him leave, or he left me there. There was some kind of awkward kiss at the door, and I never saw him again, never even exchanged numbers. Not sure we even exchanged names. I don't tell people this. I don't tell people. I just kept on drinking, living life as usual. I didn't notice anything, nothing new, nothing wrong. When it happened, I thought I didn't know period cramps could hurt so bad. I didn't know these period cramps were actually my little daughter rushing out of my toxic womb in a mere 2.5 hours of labor. She was 2 pounds 6 ounces. She was a fighter, a go-getter, the doctor called her. She knew she had to get out, and she got out, he said. You're lucky. She seems as if she'll be perfectly fine. Perhaps a little retardation. You'll forgive his word of the R word, I hope. It's still a clinical term, he told me. Like Forrest Gump? I asked, crying. The doctor said, I'm not sure exactly. I don't tell people how the doctor tried to comfort me, how he set his hand on my shoulder, how I slapped his hand, his face, how the IV popped out of my arm. I don't tell them how she, my little daughter, thrived for 3.5 weeks, how the doctor said she's doing so well. He's never seen a little one with so much spunk, how she suddenly had an attack of gastrointestinal perforation, how she screamed and flailed around and was rushed to surgery. I don't tell them how her little eyes pleaded with me, how they still plead, so afraid of missing out on the future. I don't tell them how my love for her has begun to feel pathetic, a morbid little secret I will not let go of. Time heals, they say, but it does not change what is. She will forever have lived, but will in fact never live. The doctors tried and tried, but couldn't do anything in the end. Her little body they cremated. She sits on the mantle above the fire. The reality TV show is wrapping up. The woman has seen all the therapists and is saying that she will try to stop eating her husband. Credits roll over her slow motion face as she tastes just one last little bit with that strange little smile. Following program has 4 contestants feeding cupcakes to 4 judges for the chance to win money and fame. But as I'm watching, I can't stop looking at my daughter in her urn, just barely less than a pound of white ash. I can't stop wondering how she would taste, how she would feel under my tongue, against my cheeks, my teeth. I reach up, take her off the mantle, hold her close to my chest. I lie on the couch and place her gently on the cushion beside me. I wrap my arm around her so she doesn't fall. I check the seal, fondle it as I lie there, crying, whispering, my baby, oh baby, dear baby, sweet baby. So that's one story. And this next one I'm going to read, I'm reading because I was asked as part of my build up to the release of the book by an organization called All Lit Up. This is a Canadian organization that focuses on small presses and small publishers, but online mostly. You can go there and order books from small presses, and it's free shipping. The idea being to bring a higher level of access to small publishers and the work that they're putting forward. So every year they have a thing that's called Cozy Fest, and they invite artists who have published with small presses to read a work in a cozy environment. So they record themselves in pajamas, maybe in front of a fire, and they read like a happy, friendly story. And so my publicist contacted me. She said, I have this opportunity. Would you like to do it? And I was like, at first, I was like, yes, that is perfect. That sounds awesome. Who wouldn't want to do that? And so she said, here are the details. Here are the due dates. You have to have a recording by this day and everything. So I was going through my book and trying to find a bit in it that was heartwarming, that might feel happy and cozy in front of a fire. And as the deadline came closer, eventually, instead of sending a video of myself in pajamas reading a happy story, I sent an email that said, I don't think my collection is all that happy. So I missed out on that opportunity, which I hope does not suggest that there's that this collection is hopeless. I do feel by the end it is filled with hope, and that was important for me because while it's an extension of myself, and often I feel depressed and anxious and hopeless, I always come to a point where I'm hopeful for the future. I still feel that way. I hope the book feels that way. But anyway, this story is one that I think is probably the happiest by the end, even though it too is not that happy. I hope you don't think I'm a crazy person. You wouldn't be the first. So this story is called In a Way That Doesn't Make Me Cringe. The book is set up so that in the titular story is called Grandview Drive. It's about one character who interacts with a lot of minor characters from afar. So you get to see his perspective and what he thinks of all these characters on the outskirts. He fantasizes about them having perfect lives and wanting to be a part of all of these perfect people, their lives, and be close to them. The rest of the stories take the people he's been fantasizing about and tell their stories, and none of them are quite as perfect or happy as it seems. So they're all sort of connected. So this story, as I'm reading, I'm aware of all the connections to the 3 or 4 other different stories, but you won't be unless you buy it and read it. I'm not sure why I said that yet. Well, only that while I do think this is a good story that stands on its own as a short story, it's only a part of the story. And You want to read the whole book. Okay, in a way that doesn't make me cringe. A novel comes to mind about which the author said she wanted to add at least one example of a lasting marriage to the tradition. She said she wrote the entire thing because she worried about a gang of extraterrestrials reading a sample of humanities literature and calculating a rate of next to 100% of marriages ending in divorce. She could think of very few books and even fewer movies in which whole families were happily glued together, thought the literature proposed marriage to be a certain way of being miserable. If you were desperate for divorce or at least cheating with your wife's best friend, one of you would die and the other would heroically mourn the first's death until he or she fell magically in love again, at which point they'd start in on a doomed marriage. Back when I read it, I thought how nice it is that my wife and I, if someone were to write about us, would add to the happily married side of the pile. And maybe the extraterrestrials wouldn't think we human beings were all that crazy. I straightened my tie and wiped my palms, trying to remember who the writer was, what she would think of us now, nervous and sweaty all over again. I married the love of my life. I'll admit that. We married young, claimed each other as soulmates, but we were also filled with the naivety of newlyweds that made us believe each time we fought or felt that the other was treating us unfairly, that we had made a huge mistake. She would say things like, "Sometimes I wonder if I really should have jumped in like this." And as stoic and determined as I claimed to be, this killed me. I would pout off to the car and drive halfway to Mount Pleasant, dreaming up these scenarios of pulling into a hotel and meeting some beauty and starting some wondrous little fling, or just driving until I ran out of gas and being picked up by another beauty and starting off on our blissful life. These were ridiculous, I knew, and I'd always turn back and head home to apologize. But always between that U-turn and home, I would try to figure out if one could really find the love of one's life so young. Could I fall in love at 19, marry at 22, and love that person forever? Could she love me? She'd come sobbing to the door, and we'd make out over the threshold of her tiny house, make our way to the bed where she'd make me believe it was possible to be in love forever. We'd spoon all night, and I'd feel unstoppable. But it didn't ever last, and I started to believe, like most of humanity's art, apparently, that there was no way one person could spend their entire life loving only one other person. Yet here we are, though I'd never have guessed it. Standing here, waiting for everything to start, I try not to think of all that. "Are you okay?" Abigail snuck into the room. I've been told to hide. Sorry. Abigail has snuck into the room I've been told to hide away in. My Abigail. She was, as they say, an accident, which I'm sure E.T. would assume is the case for all children, but I could see the relief in Madison's face when she told me. And somehow I felt like we should have found her, as if she were the inevitable piece that had been missing. We could easily love each other forever with a heap of crying cuteness between us. Madison had terrible pregnancies, morning sickness long after the literature said it would subside, outrageous weight gain all over, even her feet, acne, and relentless misery. But still, I couldn't stop watching her. It was as if the universe had heard my petty questions and so opened up and pushed me to her. I would not stop looking at her, thinking about her, touching her in ways I had never before, as if the ways her baby was changing her were showing me the depths to which I had not explored. Even the little pimples I could feel under my fingers were exciting. She was a wreck. Took sick leave a month before she was due, but I could feel her settling into my new devotion, hesitant at first, not believing I could love her like this. I too found her watching me as I read on the couch or did the dishes, as if she couldn't believe my happiness was trying to catch me out. I'd feel her staring. I'd let her smile into the sink, then blow her a kiss. Watch her blush. "Of course I'm okay," I tell Abigail. "I'm fine. Yeah, you look stunning." I can watch her trying to deny it in her mind, a habit she's long had, but I believe is getting over. "Thanks, Dad," she says, "but no one will be noticing me." "Abigail," I say. "Why would they?" she says. "I'm not looking for attention anyway." She is beautiful. All the mess and tangles of hurt, the missed opportunities of child rearing, did a number on us. For a very long time, I couldn't look at her without anger or blame, my own pain flooding up, So to look at her now today, ready to embrace her parents once more, all of that garbage floating off into the distant past, I am taken by her courageous beauty. When she was born, she looked nothing like either of us. She was a great mystery to me, though I loved her so, and loved her more for tying me to her mother. But the unfamiliarity of this tiny baby made it impossible for me to imagine anything about her future, the way I had imagined a miniature version of Madison running about before her birth. Every stage of her life had this mystery, I think, but probably everyone she knew, except maybe Delaney. They won't be looking at me when they see you walking next to me, I tell her. Oops. Dad, you'll be fine. I mean, you've done all this before, right? I know. Well, I'm just so glad you're here. I know, she whispers, maybe about to cry. Me too. She very nearly wasn't here, but that's not anything I want to think about right now. Though when have I ever been able to stop rolling it around my head once I've started down the road thinking about it? Delaney wouldn't. Oh, damn it, Delaney. She wouldn't have been here anyway. Couldn't have been. And she won't ever be anywhere now. This will always be true. I've come to realize, no matter how much time has healed us, how many have moved on, she will never be present. Truthfully, I think I always worried that Abigail might try to kill herself. I think she always believed we didn't love her, or at least that we loved Delaney more than her. She lived a pensive childhood, always deep inside herself, trying to sort out what people actually meant by what they were saying, what you mean, as if her childhood innocence was left balled up in the womb. There was a time when she was so young she couldn't yet say her L's. I love you, Abby, I'd say to her, and she'd say, how come? She'd look up at me and ask me, how come you love me? Just saying it wasn't enough. She needed proof. In fact, one of my biggest regrets, easily the one I think of most often, was not having an immediate answer. It was natural for a father to love his daughters, so natural that when asked for a reason, all I could muster was a bumbling, because you're so beautiful. Delaney might have accepted this. I think she always believed she was beautiful. Abby just turned her eyes away from mine, picked some fluff off her shoulder. She was dismissing the idea, even at 3 years old. Delaney barely even born yet. How do you explain why you love somebody? You make me so happy. I can't imagine life without you. These years without you have been so miserable. Talking about Madison now, obviously. How different these loves are, yet still as complete. You make me want to be a better man. You keep me up at night imagining summer walks and spring picnics. I can't sip a latte without remembering our first date all those years ago. I can't shop for groceries without wondering if you still eat those rice cakes. Can't drive in the country without playing our old tunes. Can't do anything or go anywhere with another woman without comparing it to how I felt with you. Is even love so selfish that the only way to explain it is to say I feel happier when I'm with you than without? And what if the other feels less happy? And how can we know? And what if it changes? Again, do I fight for her because she makes me happy, or should I fight for her happiness, which may or may not always include me? Which I'm almost sure I would not if it did not, in fact, include me. Is that love? Leaving someone else to, it's going to be perfect, Dad, Abigail says. She keeps her eyes on mine, still sorting out what I'm up to. You guys are made for each other. Everyone knows that. I know. Yes, we are. Of course. Of course. And you can't get cold feet now after all this. I know. I'm not. I'm just nervous. I can't imagine a life without your mom. Tell me about it, she says, and she touches her forehead. I must have figured what were the odds of both of my girls doing it. So once Delaney, it's harder for me to say it with Delaney. Once she hanged herself in the closet, I just stopped worrying about Abigail. Fully stopped, as if I had never worried before. Delaney was such a shock, such a huge shock, engaged, happy, though obviously not happy. Over the days and years that have followed, I've run through her whole life 1,000 times, and I should have known she wasn't happy. She was so obviously unhappy. But so was I. Was, so was her mom, and Abigail, I guess. Delaney's unhappiness just hit out in full sight. Her weird obsession with death after the wreck out on the street. She talked about that for years and seemed to enjoy funerals. She'd joke about her mom and I being old, getting old, what her and Abby would be like when we were gone. And she was so mean to everyone, herself, everyone, but in the stupid, witty way that made it all funny. When her fiance ended it, she just hung herself. She must have thought about it before that, she must have, but I can also imagine her, Delaney, thinking it and setting out to do it in the same breath. Abby found her. Poor Abby. I always forget this. She told me she had been writing her own suicide notes for years before Delaney, and so felt as if Delaney had stolen even that from her. What miserable parents we were. I'm just kidding, Abby says. I'm just happy for you guys. I'm just happy you guys, I don't know, found each other again, she says. And yeah, that I'm here to see it. Exactly the thing to say to make me cry. It took me so long to figure out what her note was saying. I still have nightmares when I'm standing reading the note while Abby's suffocating in the Volvo. Damn it. I wanted a book, I think, something from Abby, and I went over there at some time I knew Madison would be gone, and there was the note on the floor by the stove. Tell Dad I loved him. The past tense doing the trick. I should have known from the first sentence, but I must have been able to deny it. This has already happened, I was thinking. There must be rules against it happening twice. Damn it. Loved. She loved me. I must have flown through the city. I don't remember any of the drive. I was in the kitchen, then I was out at Blue Sand Trails, pulling her out of the Volvo, doing CPR until the ambulance got there. I don't even remember calling them. Maddie and I were forced to tolerate each other if we wanted to be part of Abby's recovery. I asked Madison later, much later, probably around when we decided to be official again, as Abby called it, what she thought when she saw me in the hospital waiting area. Overwhelming relief, she said, though she asked me what the hell had happened as if it were my fault, I reminded her. I had to blame someone, she said, and she slapped my shoulder lightly, a bitty little smile on her face. But I left the comment hanging there too long, and she started to cry. She went from the joke to crying so fast all I could do was offer her my pocket square. Why couldn't I cry like this with Delaney, she said. She said this quite a few times. She wanted so badly to cry back then, but refused to cry in front of me with Delaney. What the hell happened, she asked, standing in the middle of the waiting room. I don't know, I told her. You don't know, she said, looking around at the worried strangers. Who the hell brought her here then? You called me, didn't you? You should get down to the general. That's all you said. What the hell, Jeremy? What happened to Abigail? Here, and passed her the note. She read the first few lines. Oh my God, she said. I stood. But even now, I don't know what I was going to do. And she took off down the hall, not running, but I knew I was to sit back down. You did cry, I would tell her, but not with you. They couldn't with you. This was one of those times I was convinced we were doing the right thing by getting back together. She blew her nose into my pocket square, then wiped her cheeks, her eyes, with a clean side, and handed it back. I slid it into my pants pocket, squeezed her hand in mine, then the past opened up before me in a tidal wave that came crashing down on us. It swept me up in all these moments I thought were gone forever, so that in that moment, in the Starbucks on Main, I knew we were right to be together again. The thing you'll notice, though, whoever you are, the aliens reading this, is that we humans are easily capable of believing a thing to be certain one day and believing the opposite to be true the next. That is to say, we had a lifetime of pain and regret and divorce behind us that seemed to prove we shouldn't be together, and a snotty pocket square was hardly stand-up evidence against it. We recycled plenty of old arguments about the girls mostly, and invented new ones about whatever we could think of. But Abigail was getting better, asking us to give her space even, and Maddie and I still wanted to see each other. Well, I'll be here around 6 anyway, I said. We were leaving Starbucks after Abigail had explained that we wouldn't need to babysit her anymore. I no doubt had convinced myself that I still wanted to meet with Abby just to be certain or what have you. But when Madison said, oh good, I'll meet you, I thought to myself, yes, I knew you would. And I said, swell then, like I used to when the girls were young. Our new arguments never made me angry, but awoke something in me that would acknowledge she was right. Not in a sitcom way, but in a way that made me feel as if I were somehow growing. I felt desperate to apologize to Madison after a night of thinking and determined to make it through the next day. How strange to use these words, dating, official, my place, yours, love. You can't cry yet, Dad. Found each other again, I say. I like that. And I'm glad the usher, my grown nephew, sticks his head through the door. It's about that time, he says. Deep breath, says Abigail, and she takes one herself. I've never felt more connected to Madison than I do now, even after Delaney. After Delaney, when Maddie relied on me for nearly everything, from bathing her to reminding her to eat, there was a disconnect there, and I suppose a resentment growing in each of us. But today, I love Madison in a way that doesn't make me cringe when I say it, that makes me nervous and sweaty, but also plain old giddy to walk down that aisle, to wait for her at the altar again. This is what I mean about it. I mean, it's hopeful and I guess happy at the end, but it's not a happy story. Um, so thank you. I think I'll stop there and you want to hold it?
Sure. All right, so Lisa, if you want to come up, you two can have a seat here. And I'll keep it back on. Oh, you both have one.
Yes.
Are we good? Yep.
Well, good evening. Can you hear me okay? Well, I'm really pleased to be here tonight, to be a part of your book launch. It's pretty exciting. First book,
First book.
first fiction. It's such a labor of I'm saying love with like this twitch in my eye to go through, write a book, edit it probably endlessly if you're anything like me. The publishing process, like there's just a lot going on there. And sometimes I wonder why we do it to ourselves, right? Like this lonely, solitary, hard work that is writing, because it really is by yourself. But here we are at a book launch for your book, and I think this is maybe the payoff, right? Like this is the build community. This is the part where you don't have to do it all by yourself still, because it's a really sort of a lonely thing to be doing. So we get to have this celebration, right? The celebration of your book. And so I'm really pleased to be here to help you celebrate. And while I say that I sometimes don't know why we do it. In your case, I'm really glad you did do it, and that you had that persistence, because a lot of writing is so much about it's hard work and it's about persistence. And now we have this, new entry into Canlit, this new fiction book, and it's already before it was even a book, it already won a couple of prizes. Do you want to tell me just a little bit about that before I get in? I have all these questions. I'm just gonna pepper you with questions. So
Okay, yeah. Well, I have been working on this book for a long time. I mean, you hear the stories all the time of people saying it took them 10 years or whatever. And it really did. I wrote the first story, I think, in 2009, which was the title story, Grandview Drive. And all of the other stories came out of that, but then it took me, like, between then and now, I earned 2 degrees and had 2 kids and was working full time, and so like I wasn't writing every day, and it took me 10 years to write 270 pages. But over 10 years, I think I wrote the last story in 2019, and I said to myself, I just got to stop and try to figure out what to do with this. So, of course, there's revisions of each story. I don't know how it works for novels yet, but like I would write a story, I would maybe show it to a couple of trusted friends, I would edit according to their remarks or not, but always with editing. So each story has like 5 or 6 or 7 or more revisions. Yeah. In 2019, I submitted it to the John B. Hicks Long Manuscript Award, which is through the Saskatchewan Writers Guild. It's for unpublished manuscripts. And every year it alternates between fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. It has to be a completed manuscript but unpublished. So I submitted to that just kind of on a whim. Like I felt like I was stuck with the book, so I just wanted someone else to tell me it was like worthwhile, I guess. And yeah, I did play second there. I was first runner up. which led then to Kato Books in Regina asking to read it, and they said they'd like to publish it, but then they went bankrupt before they could do that. And then I was submitting it all of these other places, and then I met you in 2022, and you suggested Nightwood, and then less than a year, I guess just over a year later, the book is out, and feeling good about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know what? To get your book accepted by a publisher and have it come out within a year, like Nightwood's really fast
Yeah.
compared to others. Yeah.
I got a phone call in March. He didn't even really introduce himself. He's just like, "Hey Tim, this is Silas." I'm like, "Hello." He's like, "Yeah, I think we want to publish your book." So I'm like, "Oh." He's like, "Oh, I'm from Maywood. I'm the president or whatever." And then yeah, he said, "I really like your voice, and I think we should push it to get it out for the fall." And I said, "Okay." So then we had to do we had to do all the edits and copy edits and the whole other round. And it was a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a
After
lot
the
of
work.
work after the work. Yeah, good. That's awesome. That's really good. I saw this and Nightwood are really great to work with,
Yeah.
so I like to recommend them to lots of people. So this idea of 16 linked stories, and then the stories also stand alone, right? Like on their own. So you don't need to know the links, but then they're there sort of like I don't know, it just adds that other layer to the whole collection. Just, I don't know, can you tell us a little bit about where that idea came from or how it grew or how it became, what it was, what it is?
Yeah. It came pretty like naturally or accidentally. In that I always wanted to write a collection of short fiction. I know people have differing ideas about short fiction as compared to novels, and like I love novels and read them all the time. But my one true love is short fiction. I feel like you can do so much in a short story that you can't necessarily do in a novel, and vice versa. But the ways when you're messing around with form and different things, a good short story can like knock the socks off you. So I wanted to write a collection of short stories without feeling like I was just practicing for a novel. So I was working on some stories, and my ex-wife at the time read one, and she said, "I thought short stories are supposed to be creepy." So then I was like, "Well, yeah, lots of them are." I was reading Poe and The Lottery and these creepy stories. And I was like, "Yeah, okay, maybe I'll try to write a creepy story." So one of the creepiest things I could think of was a peeping Tom. So in Grandview Drive, a peeping Tom is driving down the street and spies on people who leave their lights on and their blinds open. Um, and then through that, another buddy was reading that, and they said, "I always think short stories are violent," and I think, yeah, I guess they kind of are. And but like these things just sort of start spinning in my head. So then out of that came the ones really looking. Uh, I don't want to spoil it, but it is rather violent. But that just happened to be one of the characters that the peeping Tom was so enamored with and thought they lived such a happy, perfect life. Then this life they actually lead turns into this violent, crazy mess. And I just like that idea. And so then I kind of thought, who else could I talk about it in this main story? And it turns out that that whole street had a lot of crazy characters that I spent a long time with.
Well, I think it works. Like it just turned out so well, this sort of experiment of what you were trying to do. I'm really glad you read that story, the Baby Oh Baby one tonight, because I was thinking about it and thinking about, a couple of things. I was thinking about how heartbreaking that story is. But also thinking about, you know, this sort of depth and the way that you're able to create these scenes and like so many, like you're just dropping us into these people's lives. You know, and I was kind of blown away by the imagination of it, right? Because I can't think of anything to write about lately. So, um, you know, you just have this variety, these many characters. Um, where do you think that comes from for you? I mean, I know it's a sort of a slow build, right? Like it builds over time, but uh, I don't know. Everybody always wants to think it's about the author, even though it's fiction, right? And I don't want to ask you that because I feel like that's weird and I hate getting asked it myself. But there's another author that talked about like like just because these ingredients aren't in the cupboard, it doesn't make them supper. It's what you make out of them that turns them into supper. So, you know, just I'm saying that very badly. I'm paraphrasing really poorly. But the idea of, you know, where is this coming from, right? These fully formed characters and these scenarios and the imagination that has to go behind that. I don't know. Just comment on that. I'm not even making sense, but
Okay, yeah, it is a question. I was just talking about it with my partner, not on the way here, but a few days ago, about how strange it is that everyone wants to know how autobiographical this book is. And I'm like, well, it's not. There's people who are literally out of their minds doing outrageous things that I would never consider to be. There's a literal peeping Tom. That's weird. That's not me. All of this. But I really fell in love with short stories in university when I did an English lit degree. We were studying short fiction, and I read uh, an essay by Frank O'Connor, which is a famous essay regarding short stories. It's called The Lonely Voice, which the very basic premise of it is that uh, short stories differ from novels in that short stories take what he calls the anti-hero, someone who is not the hero of a story. Very often, you, the reader, do not um, sympathize or empathize or even recognize yourself in the main character of a short story because the main character of a short story is so often uh, on the outskirts. At least in their own mind, they believe they are marginalized and they're the weirdos, and everyone else thinks they're weird. And it's uh, the main characters attempt to enter into society in a meaningful way. That makes sense. This idea of a lonely person struck me as something I want to explore because I have often felt lonely, even in the crowd, amongst a crowd of people. I grew up in a in a household and in a community that all uh, claimed to believe the same things, and I very often had questions like, and I thought, I don't know if I believe all of this. So even within a crowd of people that were my friends and cared about me and loved me and did all the nice things for me, I felt alone because there was a disconnect there. So in writing short stories and finding this essay about the lonely voice and marginalized people, even though, well, you know what I mean, I guess. It just so these stories are not autobiographical, except for the characters are all lonely and trying really hard to connect to other humans, which is something that I have been trying to sort through my whole life.
that's great. That's really a good way to answer that kind of question. I get that a lot too, especially about Ruby with my last book. Everybody thinks that's me, and it's like, well, come on, no. But yeah, they want to know how much is true and how much isn't. So thanks for that answer. I really appreciate it. Um, you know, I sat down. I was trying to write questions, and I had more comments than questions. Like I was thinking about the dialogue and how you use it, and how much you use dialogue in your stories, and how well done it is, how realistic, how believable, and that it's doing so much, right? Like it's propelling forward. You're either learning about the characters or you're propelling the plot, or you know what I mean? There's just so much work that the dialogue is doing, and yet it seems effortless. So I don't know if you want to comment a little bit on dialogue. And I actually think I have better questions than that, but I need to ask people here if they have questions too. So let's do the dialogue one and then we'll open it up.
Okay. Thank you so much for saying that. That makes me feel like giddy and excited. uh, Proud of myself. The short answer is I don't know how I did that. A longer answer is back in uni when I was writing a lot of these stories. I spent a lot of time in the library at the university and at Starbucks in chapters, just like, doing homework, studying. And okay, here's the story. It's a good story. I was at chapters, sitting in the spot that I always sit at. And at that time, there was a whole stack of board games or puzzles or something right beside the Starbucks in chapters. And these two dudes were there. And one of them was like, "Do you think you could tell a story using just dialogue?" The other guy, the other guy was like, "Well, I think that's called a screenplay." He's like, "No, just dialogue. No directions, just dialogue." And then they went off or whatever. And so then I said, I wonder if you really could do that. And so I started this blog. It's called Found Dialogue. I think it's still on the internet. The first entry was those two talking to each other, just dialogue. That little bit. Can you tell a story with just dialogue? The title of it was "Buy the Board Games at Starbucks," something like that. Just straight transcription as much as I can remember that story. And people seem to like it. People are like, "Oh, this is interesting," whatever. So then I eavesdropped on people and just wrote their conversations anonymously, like there were never names or anything, just like as straight as I could remember as possible. The titles was always like in the bookstore, at the university, just like wherever and I did that for maybe a year, and I was amazed at the weird things people say out loud to each other when you're really listening to people. Like, I know that's weird, but yeah, Margaret Atwood read it because I used to share it to Twitter, and because there was one where these two people at the university, they're like, quickly, the one person was like, "What are your classes? Oh, English. Oh, what are you reading? We're reading Margaret Thatcher." And then the second person was like, "What's Margaret Thatcher written?" And then she's like, "Oh, she's written lots of books. I wish I could remember the names, but she writes poems and she writes." And so finally the person's like, "You mean Margaret Atwood?" And she's like, "Oh, yes, Margaret Atwood." So I wrote that down as best I could. And then I think I tagged Margaret in that one. And she retweeted it to all of her followers. And then 2 weeks later, she retweeted me again saying my daily cackle for the last 2 weeks. Which made me feel cool. So that's a very long way of saying I have spent a lot of time eavesdropping on strangers and I think it helped my dialogue.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I like that a lot. So cool. Okay, any questions from anyone? Yeah, out there.
So you said obviously Grandview Drive isn't autobiographical, but you do have a fascination with autofiction, if I'm correct. Is that something maybe you're working on for the future, something we could see published down the road?
Yeah, yes. In fact, my second book was a novel, and I would say it's straight autofiction. Like Tim is the main character. It's about a kid growing up in a pretty strict fundamentalist evangelical church and the pressures he felt there and everything he went through, and then eventually leaving and Tim is the main character. The rest of the characters, their names have been changed, and it is like autobiographical, definitely 100%. But there's no way I could sell it or pitch it as a memoir because I've stretched things, I've pulled things out and added, and stuff like that. But yes, autofiction has been my obsession for a while now. So I think it will be hard for me moving forward to write anything that's not very close to who I am as a person.
Yeah, that's awesome. That was on my list of questions, so I'm glad you asked that. Anybody else? Something you're dying to ask Tim? His work. Tim is going to sign some books at the front here, so I think you can just like take a book, get him to sign it, and then pay for it after. You don't have to like run and pay for it before he faces it with a pen. It'll be okay. I hope.
That's true.
Okay.
You're right.
Yeah, I felt like I better check with you. Just making that up.
No, you got it.
Before we go, why don't you just give us a quick, you're like a publisher's dream with your social media stuff. Like every publisher wants you to, as an author, like I'm busy writing books, but they want me to be like this social media something and get 1 million followers and all this stuff. Well, Tim's like making us all look bad because he's already doing all of that. So tell us about your platforms. Tell us what you're doing on social media. Just plug it away.
Okay, around the same time, October 2022, I just made a TikTok account because my son was obsessed with it at the time. He doesn't even really care about it that much now, but at the time he was obsessed with it, and I was trying to I would get him to show me who he's following on his device, and he's like, just make your own and follow me, and you can spy me from your phone. So I did. I made an account, and I followed him, and I could see who he's following and making sure he's not getting up to no good or whatever. But then, because TikTok is so tuned to who you are, it started showing me all these people talking about books, book talkers, they called themselves. And so the more I was on there, the more I was watching people talking about books, and I have a library of 1,200 books in my living room, and I like talking about books, and so I'm like, I could do this. So yeah, I just started. The first few videos I made were just the worst, just so embarrassing. You can go watch them if you want, but I just kept making videos and was getting more and more followers, and yeah, in May last year, so I had just found out I was publishing my book. So then I started thinking maybe I could use this to talk about my book or whatever. But in May, I had a goal to, by the end of May, I wanted to have 2,500 followers. And then I had 2 videos crack off and get like close to 1 million views each. And then I went from 25, I had 25,000 by the end of May, and now it's sort of slowly going. I have about 44,000 followers. And I just talk about books, 5 books that made me laugh, 5 books that I wish I could read again, 5 books, blah, 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 blah. Also buy my book at the end of it, sort of thing. So it's been cool. And through that, I've met a lot of people, and Emily Austin is on there too. She wrote Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. She blurbed my book just because we were both on there, both talking about the writing process, and we went back and forth, and she ended up reading the book before it came out and all this stuff. And so yeah, through that I met her, and then a bunch of people were like, you should start a podcast. I could listen to you talking about books forever. So I started a podcast. It's called Tim Blackett and Friends. It's very new, but I've had 2 episodes, which I'm very excited about. Emily Austin was the first. And then because she said yes, and then Lisa said yes, and a bunch of other people said yes to this podcast, I sent an email to people I have no business sending emails to. Sheila Heti, for instance, who's like my favorite author ever. She wrote Motherhood and Pure Color and How Should a Person Be? The queen of autofiction in my mind. And she said, sure, I'll come on your podcast. So she was episode 2. And then, so I have Graham Burnett, who's like a Booker Prize nominated, shortlisted author. He too is just like, yeah, sure, sounds fun. And I'm playing it off as like funny, but I'm very excited and nervous. Jessica Johns is coming on. She's coming on next, and then there's local people that I want to have on too. Michael Tressler or Eddie Lundy. Lisa has agreed eventually. Connor Kerr, who's published with Nightwood too. You should read his book, Anew of Champions. But yeah, so Tim Blackett and Friends is my podcast. Tim R. Blackett is on TikTok, and I'm just talking about books. Oh, and I started a YouTube. I only put like 4 videos up.
Okay, so now you know where to find Tim on social media. Well, I think that's it, unless there's anything else you want to add.
I feel like I've been rambling, so I think that's good.
Yeah,
Thank you again.
it's been really great. Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for coming. It's always wonderful to see people come up to a book launch and get Tim to sign your book, and have a great night. Merci.